Hello, everybody. Thank you for returning to our YouTube channel. I am Brian. This is my co-host, Master Kredikin, former Navy SEAL. We are part of Technology United for Ukraine. If you'd like to join us, we look for engineers, scientists, or anybody who wants to help out Ukraine, and we bring innovative technologies to the Ukrainian military and civilian sector. Link is in the description. All right, so we've been waiting for Matthew to come back. I told you he'd be here eventually. He's doing some things over in Ukraine. And what I want to do is get your take, Matthew, on what's happening with this invasion of Ukraine into Russia through the Kursk region. So first thing I'll do is I will share some maps so we can get an idea of what's going on. The first one is this one here. So what's being reported is they have now crossed over into this area here. There's obviously reports that they have gone a lot further, and we can get that later. But what's your thoughts about what they're doing, why the Russians weren't able to answer this?
Yeah, there's defensive lines drawn behind the actual border because it's easier to put those defensive lines in, and probably they didn't really realize how effective or ineffective their own defensive networks were. Like the Ukrainians suffered in some of the Russian offensive earlier, is that there was corruption in the construction of the various defensive works. And I wouldn't be surprised if something similar didn't happen there, where you had some weaknesses. And, given the Russian command structure, it's probably, fairly hard for them to really understand what goes on at certain lower levels without a lot of macro managing. And, given the nature of those power structures, when you have those tyrannies, you don't really have very good understanding of what's happening at the lower levels. And it's just endemic of the tyrannical, concentration of power. So on the military side, they're dedicating their resources to the offensive, and I think the Ukrainians noticed those weaknesses and took advantage of it.
So here's another map that gives a perspective. It's kind of showing the routes that they're going. So I imagine there must be, obviously there's roads you can see here. They're following the roads to the various destinations because we have the city of Kursk here. And then they're cutting through this way here. I can go on to the deep state map to kind of give a better perspective. But what do you think? Do you think they're going to capture a large swath of land? What do you think their goal is here? Because it's not just an incursion where they're going in to pull back out.
Well, I think they will probably eventually. They're going to basically run rampant. I don't think they're necessarily going to. They may try to push to those strategic objectives where you have the oil pipeline exchange. And looks significant that they would capture that, but the thing you have to also realize is that same pipeline runs through Ukraine, and it's kind of by some kind of weird mutual agreement that apparently no one talks about, that Ukraine hasn't shut that pipeline down. Why? Because it goes to Europe, and Europe is essentially Europe and America are funding the war. So odd bedfellows when it comes to distribution of energy. Still nice to be able to control that junction. Obviously people talked about the nuclear power plant to take control of that. A lot of this is a big morale boost, but it also just caused a lot of damage to their military and their industrial infrastructure, because you can just drive up to it and blast it.
And by the way, where you're talking about, just so everyone knows, is right here, and I'll blow the map up, is where the pipeline goes through. So it comes from out here somewhere way, way, way deep into Russia. So the pipeline you're talking about, that the Ukrainians have an agreement with the Russians to allow that pipeline to exist. So let me get rid of this now. It's moved, but it's right about here.
You can kind of like highlight where the Ukraine border is because the map's kind of lacking. So.
Yep, I got to. I'm having problems here. Let's see. Here we no, it's being silly now. I hate when it does this. Well, it's right here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Big fat because this thing changed on us. Let me fix this right here. Here we go, just like this. So when it's right about here is where the pipeline comes in.
Yeah. So, it sounds like they may have captured that or have some control over it. And it might not be as big a deal. It's always good to control these things. They're negotiation points for later. So they may try to hold that in a way that causes the Russians a lot of damage. So being able to basically go down those highways and push forward and basically force a Russian response while you go after high value targets, whether that's like fuel supply, and then set up choke points. So any kind of Russian counterattack, it's a costly endeavor for them. If they respond quickly, then they can get stuck in an ambush and cut apart. If they take a long time to respond, then Ukrainian units get to roam around the backfield and cause additional damage and or bring up additional forces and kind of solidify certain areas. I could see the Ukrainians, if this continues to be successful, it's still, fairly hard to tell how many troops they commit to this. And they may be just committing more depending on the flow of the battle. But I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't take at least a few kilometers into Russia and establish new defensive works. Why? Because those are all Russian buildings, Russian houses that get blown up and destroyed. If the Russians want to kick the Ukrainians out at that point. So,
real quick here. So, do you think because they're coming in? So, this is the areas they've come in to. So, this is what it looks like. This is the path. They're going up this way. Now, reports are saying that I know yesterday they were about 30 kilometers in. There's reports saying that they're just outside of Kursk in a village here called Anna Selvinska up in this area. So do you think they're looking to maybe reach an area like this, maybe go around the city, come down, take Belgorod, and maybe even hit, because there are reports they're shelling heavily right now in the rear of the Russian forces. It looks like weakening the rear to maybe ensure that the Ukrainians can come up behind them. Do you think they would take this whole area? Now, remember, I can show you what distance this is. So, so you can have a perspective. So if we look at, going up here and down here, I will give you a perspective of the distance. So that alone, just from here to there, is going to give you 118 kilometers. Do you think they would be moving out this far? Or do you think they'll stay a little more localized?
It really just depends on the amount of resistance in the backfield, which, in a lot of cases sounds like it's not a lot. Given these conditions, these dictator types don't necessarily trust having a lot of weapons around for their forces that aren't, strictly governed and engaged. So, you don't want to really slow down a whole lot and become a fixed target, because then they can start calling air and mustering their forces. So you want to basically continually keep threatening viable areas. And like you said, if they're shelling that zone, they're probably at least feinting that they may want to break through another line and open up another front for additional egress. So they can either enter or leave that same area if they can break that line. Which allows them further ranging and roving. It's like if you can, retreat out of that Belgorod zone rather than having to drive all the way back, towards Sumy area, then you can, you can resupply and you can basically threaten additional areas in Russia, which is going to make them continually shift more forces and hopefully shift forces away from their current offensives in the east. Which I'm sure would be like a large goal of theirs. Some people comment that Russia has plenty of reserve forces and that those reserve forces can't actually enter Ukraine, but they can be used in Russia itself. And that sounds nice in a textbook, but the reality is, if you're not using those forces to engage with, they're probably not very well put together or able to respond very well at the time. So if you're Ukraine, you want to get as much damage done as you can and expand the potential areas and threat areas to force them to push their organized forces that are currently on the offensive, and hopefully stunt that momentum there. And if they don't, you just keep throwing forces in and taking over key areas and setting up ambushes that you may eventually be driven out, but you set up defensive lines in such a way that it's very costly for the Russians to go take any of that stuff back. I haven't done like a deep map study of that area, but I'm sure there's some open areas and choke points where even if the Russians, in order to really kick them out, once they start to establish fighting positions, artillery is going to be the common way the Russians would do that without taking huge amounts of casualties. But moving significant amounts of artillery to those positions is going to take time, and that's giving you time to maraud further afield and cause even more damage. So I think the Ukrainians are potentially in a really good spot. I don't think they'll necessarily stay there, and the Russians will eventually push them back. But hopefully it'll blunt as much as the eastern offensive that they're using. I'd say some potential downsides, like initially, like this gets some momentum back, some morale back for the Ukrainians, which is good. If you can continue Russian losses and never let them recover fully, then that would be, extremely good. But if the pressure comes off, and it probably will, coming into the winter, you may energize a lot more Russians to get their shit together and become better fighting forces now that they've kind of got kicked out of that zone. Give that whole section of the country a wake-up call. I mean, that is a potential, but I don't know if I feel like I have a good enough pulse on the Russian mentality in that area to know if it's just demoralizing to them or just kind of a rallying cry to get their shit together.
Well, and I think what you're
it's like
saying
an
is
immune. Yeah,
because they can use it as a recruitment method.
Yeah, it's recruitment, and it's like when you get your ass kicked, you either have the mentality to run away and give up, or start training, change your conduct and get better. So we'll
real quick,
happens.
this is where an update came from, and this is a visual confirmation that the Ukrainians are in the city, and I will not pronounce this right at all. Is Lubamovka. I don't know, but this is where they're this is visual confirmation of where they're at in Russia that was put out in social media, and that is from the border is it looks like a little more than halfway to Kursk, and out here was another town that they were in roughly around here, which was called Anasavinska. But I think this might actually be a little bit further forward. So there definitely is visual confirmation that they have made it there.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, one of the things I was just thinking, given, if they were really able to roam unchecked or relatively unchecked, then it's going to put that threat, the anti-air, the larger anti-air systems, which may for temporarily allow more friendly air assets to operate closer to those areas. So you may actually start to get some air support of some sort. I don't know. It's hard to say.
Well, they're saying that the Ukrainian air may be in there, some air support assets. There are videos, but you don't know. They could be Russians. It's hard to see, what those air sats.
Yeah, I heard them trying to, debate on whether those close attack aircraft were, which side they were.
Yeah, so it's a fog of war.
And
just so
the Ukrainians may purposely be keeping that as vague as possible. So, like, they may even just run sorties in order to confuse the Russians, so they don't know there's more than once the Russians have shot down their own stuff. And
I think it happened with a helicopter, if not incorrect. I know they blew up 2 tanks of their own, supposedly, and I think
there's been a lot more than just 2 tanks blown up on
well,
their
I'm
own.
saying by the Russians blew up 2 of their own tanks.
Oh, just in this offensive alone.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah,
And just so people know, this town that we were just talking about, it's about 55 plus kilometers into Russia. So if we look at now, let's just say, they went out this way too. They could be at this point here. If we go by, an average distance, so they could be here. So they may be securing an area like this right now, just right now, something like that. Eventually, I'm sure they're going to, and depending how much further they go out, they may be securing a lot more.
Yeah, well, I mean, by securing, I don't know exactly what you mean. Maybe putting in observation posts. They know they can roam those areas relatively.
Well, that's what us medics say. We're not Navy SEALs. we're not we're not the true warriors. But I mean, like, they're gonna take that area and under their control for occupy it.
But I think this does expose, like, the Russians have gotten a lot better at shortening their kill chain in established areas of conflict, but it appears to be, and this seems about right from what I've seen, that they still have a huge challenge when it comes to dynamic maneuver warfare. Like, they basically do super slow combined arms, and so, like, they'll build up an offensive for a Divka or a Bakhmut, and they'll basically just slowly increase their troop presence and artillery and other systems, and then over time kind of just keep pushing it slowly forward, and that creates the same effect as a combined arms system. It is combined arms, but it's not. It's just a very slow form of maneuver warfare, and if the Ukrainians are able to make these kind of breakout maneuvers, it exposes a big weakness in the Russian deeper kind of training and professionalism. And these are the kind of things they're going to need to kind of maintain their position for now until they can build more mass weapon systems or get additional support from the allies.
Let me ask you a question, Matthew. What do you think will happen? It looks like they might be working. Let me circle.
Hey, can you highlight where the nuclear power plant is, just for everyone?
Good question. I do believe I'll have to find. I think is it over here by this lake?
I have to look again.
That's a good question. Where is that nuclear power plant? Because they said that is going to be quite an issue if they do secure it. Do you remember the name of it? Because we can look that right up. Maybe nuclear. Do they have? No, there's no. But what is it? Is it in the Kursk Oblast? Kursk clear power plant. Here we go. All right, let's see. We'll go in and we'll go on a map. We'll just come here. And let's see. Let me get rid of that. So it is, where would it be? Kursk Oblast nuclear power plant. Well, it just shows maybe under Wikipedia. So, yeah, okay. So it looks like it is. We can zoom in on this. It is right here. Yeah, it's right outside. So there's the city of Kursk. Here, it would be right here. So on the deep state map, that would be somewhere around, looks like around here. Let me circle that. So somewhere around here, I do believe, right? Maybe about here. Probably right here by this lake, because they're going to need the water. There's a large lake here. So if we look back, yeah, right by that lake. If we zoom in more, it's going to be right on that lake. See that? Yep. Right where I circled. There's the lake, and that would be for the cooling. So it'd be right here, and I can blow that up. We can get rid of this here. So it'd be right there. This is where it would be.
Yeah, and this is one of the things you'll see in this continued breakout is that those who have better intelligence on where the enemy systems are can really take advantage of this. So if the Ukrainians are being fed or have the ability to pull satellite data and other, or they've established good intelligence networks that can quickly report back to the command, and the command can function as troops, and they can either set specific ambushes or offensives into the building, mustering Russian forces, and or just avoid them, so that they're constantly trying to chase a force down, but not able to, basically establish themselves. And so and if the Russians don't know exactly where the Ukrainian forces are, they're kind of blindly poking around. It could give them a distinct advantage until they can start to, basically you're going to have to take quite a large force to eventually kick the Ukrainians out.
Do you think they'll use these guys right here in the Kharkiv and then have them counterattack this way?
I mean, I think they'll have to have they have to have at least two major forces, like before they can relieve those guys from that.
And the problem with, you're right, because the problem is you have a mass of Ukrainian forces here. So, the danger is at this point, if they don't bring forces from somewhere else, primarily experienced troops from, the Donbass here, Luhansk, and where all the Chasiv, all that area where they're already fighting. If they don't bring them experienced troops, and the Ukrainians are able to get behind the Russians here, they'll be getting hammered from both sides. But if they pull these troops out, then these troops would be free to counterattack, the rear of the Russians as they go to counterattack the Ukrainians. So they're in quite a pickle, I think. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, like it remains to be seen how many. Like if it's just 1,000 forces, then you're not going to get too far. But if you can push, it looks like from these Telegram groups and whatnot, the groups they used for this offensive were your kind of assault and airborne, quote unquote, airborne units. So they should be relatively structured for maneuver warfare. Probably not super good at combined arms, but as long as there's not like established defensive networks from the Russians, then they should see relatively good success.
So you're thinking this is probably a force of maybe anywhere between 2,000 to 5,000 troops?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say.
Because obviously that wouldn't be big enough for an occupation force. If you're going
to not even close, not even close. But what you can do is like a limited penetration and see where that goes, and it's like an option playing football, right? Like, well, if the hole opens up, we'll just keep shoving more things into it. And if
do you think they'll do this?
If you can keep track of the enemy well enough, like what I was saying, then you kind of have the ability to say, well, if he's not sending experienced troops, and we know you can look at the major roadways and railways, so you can see how he's, he is only able to go down so many paths to muster his troops. If you block those, and if you can get your air power in there, that's a big and. But if you can get your air power in there and your artillery in, then you're basically going to have fire control on those pieces. So it makes it hard for them to move. So for them to move any kind of substantial force to combat you, it's tough. And if they don't have maneuver forces ready, sorry, go ahead.
Isn't there a rail system over here going into both?
Roughly, I'd have to look at a closer map.
Yeah, I think there is a rail system that they have gotten really close to. So, that's going to choke off these troops here if they or have fire control over that railway.
Yeah. So they're just definitely disrupting the supply lines. And again,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's just hard to say. I mean, I hope this is all true. And I hope they've been able to break out that far. We'll see, though. We'll see.
Right. It's
the fact that we're still talking about it is a great sign.
and do you think they would move the border up? So you see how they have this area here, which is goes. The Russians are obviously have territory that pokes into Ukraine, do you think that they would move, after they're done attacking here, is that they would move the borders to be more even?
You're talking who would move the borders?
The Ukrainians would move their troops up a little further. So this way
Yeah, I
they,
mean, so again, I haven't done a real good map study of this area, but
yeah.
I would. I mean, you move up to where you have good natural defensive lines, right? And ideally, you move up in a way that utilizes Russian buildings and land. So when they start dropping cabs and fabs and all that and blowing everything to hell, it's now Russian stuff that's getting blown up and not Ukrainian houses.
So you think they could theoretically even maybe move up further, something like this, where they're, maybe, this is all Russian territory, and there's that buffer now.
I mean, it would be nice, like, to be a nice idea. This is, beyond like one. If I knew enough, then
Right.
then I wouldn't. Then I wouldn't say.
Right. Yeah,
On
it's all conjecture at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. So it would be a nice thought, but we'll see.
A lot of interesting stuff going on, a lot of mystery. We don't know what's there. We don't know the real mix of forces. So time will tell. But again, Matthew, appreciate your insight. Remember, everybody, you can join Technology United for Ukraine. Link is in the description. And Slava Ukraini. And we'll see you guys all next time.